Dear ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to present to you the paper from the Slovenian National and University Library about the libraries facing the coronavirus pandemic. Well, since the global coronavirus outbreak, the libraries, archives and museums are faced with concerns associated with the risk of virus transmissions through the surfaces and the object. The aim of our paper was to provide Slovenian libraries with guidelines for safe handling or disinfection of library materials which might be contaminated. Therefore, we have performed the literature review on the subject. We have also contacted the National Health Institute and we have considered their guidelines. My colleague, Damjana Vovk, will overview the practices in Slovenian libraries between the first and the second wave of epidemic in Slovenia. Well, how is the coronavirus disease transmitted? We know that the virus can spread from an infected person to another one in small liquid particles when they cough, sneeze, speak, or sink or breathe heavily. But also the people can potentially become infected by touching contaminated surfaces and then touching their eyes, nose or mouth. The good news is that the viruses begin to deactivate as soon as they leave human body, and after some time the risk of infection from a contaminated surfaces disappears. There was quite some research performed on the subject, with the major outcomes that the survival of the virus depends on the type of materials. We know that on non-porous materials such as glass, for example metals, ceramics, the viruses persist longer and they also survive longer on surfaces in cold conditions, dry conditions, and in dark conditions away from the sunlight. For us, perhaps the most important are the results from the REALM project, because they were performed on the library materials, different kinds of library materials, and they have realized that in case of stacked materials, the viruses survive longer. Here are just few examples of the results of the project. And on this table on the left side we can see the type of the material, and on the right side there is virus survival in days for either unstacked or stacked materials. So in case the book has a paper cover and they are unstacked, the virus will survive less than 1 day, and in case they are stacked, it will survive more than 6 days. And we can see here also that for non-porous materials such as plastic cover, CD, DVD disc, plexiglass, the virus survives longer. But in case of leather book cover, the results are the highest. So it will remain, the virus will survive on this surface for more than 8 days. However, some researchers state that the risk of transmission by contaminated surfaces is actually exaggerated, because the research was usually performed using high virus concentrations and optimal conditions. And Goldman in his paper claims that actually the chance of virus transmission is very small, and you should touch the contaminated surface within 1 to 2 hours in order to get infected. Well, the international guidelines say that the easiest, the safest, and the most inexpensive disinfectant for the library materials is time. We know that we can deactivate the virus also by using disinfecting agents, But in case of library materials, we should avoid the materials damage. We know that some disinfecting agents may also contain, for example, sodium hypochlorite, which is a bleaching agent and might cause damage to the library materials. But also, if we use only ethanol, some inks may bleed. The use of UVC light also may be an effective way to inactivate the virus. However, the use of these lights may be connected to some health risks, and also there is a problem of incomplete exposure of bound books. We know that every single page should be exposed to UVC light in order to deactivate the virus, but this is almost not possible with the machines that they are selling now. Also, because of its very high energy, UVC light may cause damage to sensitive collection materials. We know that in case of paper, for example, the UVC lights cause depolymerization of the cellulose. The international guidelines are quite similar one to another, actually. And usually the book quarantine is prescribed for different periods of time in order to deactivate the virus. But when I was searching for them on the internet, I was amused the most, for example, on the left side, because it's very simple guideline, just keep calm and wash your hands. And on the right side, there is an example from the National Library of Czech Republic, where they have advised to spray the books with ethanol solution. And actually this was also prescribed by our National Health Institute, either to use ethanol or either to use sodium hypochlorite. But actually when I was speaking to our librarians, they told me that they have realized that it might cause bleaching of their clothes, and eventually also they have realized that it may cause some damage to the books. So about the Slovenian guidelines for handling of library materials, well, yeah, we have limited ourselves only to the library materials because the general guidelines were prescribed by our National Health Institute. We have advised to separate the plastic from non-plastic materials, and that no disinfecting agent can be used on porous materials such as paper, board, and so on. We should put these materials into the quarantine for at least 3 days. But in case of plastic materials, these are, for example, children books, but also some books can be covered with plastic materials, and also CD and DVD carriers. We know that the viruses persist longer on this kind of materials. We can wipe this using 70 to 80% ethanol water solution, and of course dry this completely before it is returned to the stacks, or we can also put that into 3 days quarantine. Of course, if we wipe only the surface of the book, which is covered with plastic materials, we should know that the virus is not deactivated through the whole book. So actually, if we wipe only the surface of the book, we should also put the book into the quarantine. The use of any other disinfecting agent is not encouraged because we know it might cause damage to the paper materials. Well, we should use only ethanol, or for example isopropanol is also advised. So thank you very much for your attention, and now I will leave you to my colleague Damjana Vovk, who will go through the situation in Slovenia between the first and the second wave of epidemic in Slovenia. Thank you very much.
Welcome to all on the other side of the screen. Jasna presented you with what libraries should do to protect the health of library users and library workers and not damage books and other library materials by doing that. In March and April last year, the librarians in Slovenia did not have instructions on how to handle the returned library materials. In dealing with it, they used gloves, and books were simply returned on the shelves. Until May, many libraries didn't accept returned books, but what to borrow if you have no return? All editions of Slovenian guidelines for libraries stipulate separating PET for clean and unclean library materials. By unclean, it is understood returned library materials. They also anticipated special location for quarantined material, which should not be touched. Returned materials should be marked with the date when quarantine started. Passing months and additional findings, the quarantine period was shortened. Between July and October, many libraries practiced just one-day quarantine without additional methods. This was quite common with frequently borrowed books in public libraries. Since October, librarians were using 4 main methods: quarantine, alcohol tissues, and various bleach solutions which Jasna already mentioned. Today, they mainly use ethanol with glycerin to clean protection foil of books. In June last year, first Slovenian library started to use UVC sterilization device for books. Specialized device can sterilize 6 books in 1 minute. It is used with frequently borrowed books, but not for damaged or fragile material or cultural heritage. Thank you for your time.